Today's guest is Bryan Pellegrino, a friend of mine who is the esteemed founder of LayerZero, a famous AI innovator, champion poker player, sports club owner, leader in financial and digital asset transformation. Just before we get started, any views expressed in the podcast are views of the podcast participants and should not form a basis for making investment decisions and not be construed as recommendations or advice for engaging in investment transactions. And my views are my views alone and not those of Humla Ventures or any of the companies I've invested in. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here, Greg.
We've been waiting for this for a long time. We've had some really interesting talks offline, and I was really excited to get you on and let other people hear the innovation in your brain, and also hear your story and background. So I guess I gave the 2-second version of who you are, but maybe we could just start with just a little background from your history about how you came up through computer science and ended up at LayerZero. Do you want to take as much time as you want, but give us an intro?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I grew up in the States. I grew up in New Hampshire in like an extremely rural town, 900 people. My grandmother and grandfather had a 100-acre farm. So just like, really, really rural. Got a computer when I was 5 years old and was just like obsessed. I mostly just played video games for the first, 7 years of that. But I was just on the computer constantly. And then when I was about 12, I got introduced to programming. And that became my new love. So went to school for computer science. Ended up dropping out after 3 years to play poker professionally. By that point, I'd already been playing poker on and off for 4 years now, and was making more than I was going to make from any decent job. And I had just met I did a semester abroad my junior year in Budapest, and I had just met a French girl there, and dropped out to move to France with her. This is now my wife. We'll be married 15 years this year, so like worked out all right. But so I spent the next 8 years. Yeah, exactly. Spend the next 8 years playing poker. Played at the highest stakes you could possibly play. My wife and I did 80 countries in 8 years. We just like traveled, right? I took my laptop, I played online. We went all over the world. I played in, every major tournament and kind of event that you could play in. And that was awesome. I mean, super, super interesting time. Obviously, like young kids making decent money and just traveling and doing all of that. But we moved back to the States in 2010-ish, roughly. And bought a house in Austin, Texas, right at the very end of 2010. And then April 15th, 2011, online poker gets banned in the US. And so all of a sudden, like all of my money is frozen. I have a mortgage for the first time in my life, and I have no income, no assets, nothing. And so it was the first big moment, I guess, that teaches you a little bit about like tail risks and self-custody and all of that. It's actually very interesting. Like the entire poker world got exposed to Bitcoin at that moment because all of our payment processors, PayPal, Money Bookers, NetTeller, Skrill, all of them were now just like offline. Couldn't be used.
The US just completely shut it all down.
Completely banned poker as a whole. The site's frozen, our money on the site, everything. And so it was very interesting. All of the shady poker sites that were left in the U.S. started using Bitcoin as the medium of transfer between them. And so you would actually, you deposit Bitcoin and then they'd exchange it to a USD balance and you'd play and then you would withdraw again in Bitcoin. But so a lot of poker players then started holding Bitcoin to kind of move between these sites, kind of like your PayPal wallet. And so it was my first touch, but rather than diving too deep into crypto at the time, I started a company which was at the very inception of, it was basically same time DraftKings was being founded in daily fantasy sports, because in the law that was written that banned poker had a carve out for year-long fantasy sports. So for your Yahoo traditional leagues that everyone was playing in, But it made it, the language made it so that daily fantasy sports was possible. And so this was the very inception of that industry. We went for 2 years and then got acquired. But that turned out to be, this massive $20-30 billion industry now. So it was very interesting being on like the forefront of like regulation gets passed. One thing gets completely shut down, but there's like a loophole that enables this other thing, and then watching the entire industry kind of fight against that. So that was 2013-ish. After that, I was like, I have no clue what to do with my life. So we moved to Vancouver and I was just going to go back and play poker for one more year. And I was just like, this is miserable. Like I can't do this. And I had my best year ever financially, but I was just done with it. And so I packed up my life, my wife, my 1.5-year-old son, and we did 12 months, 12 countries with the goal of like, where are we going to live permanently? And so I started in Reykjavik, ended in Tokyo, learned a lot about myself. Primarily that 3 months in, I realized I can't not work for an entire year. And so I started to kind of like teach myself. I hadn't really written code in a while. So I started to teach myself programming through the lens of AI, just to like get back some of my skills. And so I had seen DeepMind's Atari agent demo and thought it was just like incredibly inspiring, this thing that could take random pixels on a screen and have no concept of what the game itself is and become effectively superhuman at that, right? With only one one objective function of just like maximize score. And so that was incredibly interesting. And it was the entire world, I think, was captivated. This was when you were being told self-driving cars in a couple of years. Like I have my own thoughts now about what happened during that transition and this transition now. But I got into AI, started writing models for sports, actually. So I started building out these baseball models and ended up meeting this group of MIT PhDs who had done some similar work when they were at MIT. And they were like, oh, this is amazing. We have somebody we have to introduce you to. And I was like, great. This sounds awesome. You guys are smart people. So I get on the phone call, and like the guy on the other end of the line was Billy Beane. So like,
No
Moneyball, the GM of the Oakland A's, all of that. And so I ended up building out these models and selling them to some of the pro baseball teams. It was really interesting work. And then after that, so I sort of skipped a step, I guess. Before I went to Vancouver, 2013, sold the company. I started as I was making that transition. That's when I really, really got into crypto. So like running racks of miners in my garage and like went through the full, the full 2013, 2014 cycle, ETH ICO. We were buying all this stupid stuff. Is that, there's just so much. There's the early ICO phase, which is just like fair launch random coins with Bitcoin talk people. And so did that whole thing, but 2015-ish, there's then, everything kind of died. Like industry was dead. But
dead.
Worked on these baseball models. And then end of 2016, early 2017, I really got back in. And that's when I've been like kind of very heavily into crypto. Started a company there, Open Token. It was with Daniel Chen, first engineer out of A16Z, a couple guys at a Google, comma. It was basically CoinList, kind of at the same time of CoinList, facilitated, like almost $1 billion, I think. So really a lot of volume. Ended up a bear market. They wanted to pivot. We pivoted a couple times. Company got acquired for a pretty decent amount. I went on and did other things. I went and built out. There was research being done by Noam Brown at the time. It was like University of Alberta and Carnegie Mellon were competing to be the first to solve poker, like really solve it from a superhuman stance. So they just like chess had just been done. Go was kind of on the cusp of being done. And poker was still like this massively intractable game. And so we saw the work that was being done, and we had some ideas of what we thought could be improved. So me and my two co-founders of LayerZero, actually, who were all roommates in college and known each other since university, ended up working on this for almost a year. So we took like a year-long break just to do this. And we ended up building a system, creating a new novel CFR mechanism for convergence. And we were like 5,000 times faster than both Carnegie Mellon and U Alberta. So effectively made the best poker AI in the world, published the research with Noam Brown and Facebook AI Research. Ultimately got cited by DeepMind, which was a cool full circle as a college dropout, because DeepMind inspired me to start learning AI. And then, they were citing my work, which was fun. And then after that, there really started to be like a lot more programmability in blockchains. And so like this is IDEX, Ether Delta, like we're getting the first DEXs, we're getting the first on-chain stuff. And that era was just like really fun. We got asked by a hedge fund to start building I got asked by a hedge fund to build like trading strategies between these things. And so we started building and we realized just like nobody had any idea what they were doing. And so we started building ARB and triangle ARB bots. And like this was really awesome and just like trying to get as fast as humanly possible in terms of like propagation to be included in blocks and to always be able to basically be in the right positioning. And so we're stripping apart Geth, we're rewriting it for custom node discovery. My co-founder's background was more like low latency and networking. And so it was really fun. And then one day, all of a sudden, and it's fun to see industries just like die in the blink of an eye. We started to see transactions get included into blocks. And it was just like perfect block positioning and zero gas paid. Like not like a weird amount of gas, just like zero gas. And we're like, what? Like that makes no sense. And then it was obvious. We're like, oh, like the miners are colluding against us now. It's like now we actually can't win, right? And like this whole thing got consolidated and like became flash bots. But this was like if it had not been zero, we would have not noticed for a very long time. We would have lost an astronomical amount of money getting shredded by just not being included in positions where we thought we should have. And so it was just clear that it was miner collusion. We're just like, well, we can't do this anymore. Like this is dead. And then that transition ultimately led us to LayerZero, where it was like this was the era where BNB chain was just taking off, and so you're getting kind of hammered every day with like BNB, more volume than Ethereum, more users than Ethereum, like all of this. And having been there for I don't know 9 years at that point, been adjacent to the industry. There was a lot of other things that existed, but like nobody actually used them. So it was at least like anomalous enough to be like, all right, like what's going on here? And NFTs were getting really popular at the time. And so we started to mess around. We like to kind of build toy systems. And so we built this toy system of like, what would it look like if you had an entirely ephemeral system on BNB chain? Just like you treat it as an ad hoc, cheap execution environment. And then you move everything over to Ethereum for like permanent states. We built a game. Everything in the game would be thrown away, but once you effectively won, that would get moved over to Ethereum as a permanent NFT. And we realized as we're building that, there was no way to do that without a central coordinator triggering events on both chains. We're like, well, that sucks. That kind of defeats the entire purpose of the industry to just have this central event coordinator sitting off chain. And so we're like, well, bridges exist. So like, this is a solved problem. Let's just like find the best thing to use. And we looked at all the bridges in the industry at the time, and we were just like, oh my God, like we cannot use any of this stuff. This is insane. Like almost all of those have gotten hacked at this point. And so then we started building what we thought was a better bridge with this really strong thesis about application-driven bridging versus user-driven bridging. So high levels of composability, the needs for native assets rather than wrapped assets, and all of this. And we started building that. And then as we were building that, which was the precursor to Stargate, we realized there still was no transport layer to trigger events on both chains, like same exact problem, where it would have to be like centralized. We're like, well, that's like clearly this industry cannot like live with like the intermediate pieces just being like, fully centralized systems. And so that's when we really were like, okay, like this is the thing we have to solve. We have to solve the transport layer, and that became LayerZero. So it was that was all of it. All full encompassing my background, start to finish, and how we got here. So,
and so basically the genesis of LayerZero, which is now, and I guess why don't you tell us just a little bit about? So you came to this point with LayerZero, and LayerZero is this kind of encompassing transport layer. What does that mean exactly? And speak as though you're speaking to like a layman as opposed to a programmer.
Yep. So the way that I think about LayerZero is long time ago, we had a bunch of execution environments. We had Stanford, we had DARPA, we had all these clusters, usually around universities or whatever. And if you wanted to run a program, you would have to physically load your data, fly to Stanford, and like plug it in and get the results and run it, right? And then we invent this cool stack of protocols that is the internet. And the internet enables communication between all of these distributed execution environments. And sort of the key primitive of that is a packet, right? So a packet is just, you have a computer on one side that does some computation and generates an array of bytes, really just some data, some zeros and ones, moves the bytes. And then the computer on the other side does some computation and ingests it. So it's like, okay, thanks for the message. I'm going to do something now. LayerZero at its core is that primitive. So it's arbitrary contract invocation with a bytes array. So invoke a contract on chain A, generate the bytes, move the bytes, invoke a contract on chain B with the bytes. And so if you think a blockchain really is just a distributed execution environment, same as these clusters of computers that were sitting there, you want to be able to move state and information between them, co-communicate between them, and you want to do it in the lowest level possible primitive so that it's as expressive as possible, right? You can do anything with LayerZero that can be done on a blockchain. There's no constraints, there's no extra restrictions on top of it. If you can generate the bytes and run the state transitions within the the local VM, then you can do it within LayerZero. And so LayerZero at its core is that primitive, that transport layer. And there's obviously a lot more about like how do you actually make that thing function, but at its core, that's what it is. Like think about it as a packet as you would on the internet.
Is there room for? I mean, if you're this kind of like LayerZero is it the right name? But if you're this kind of layer sitting above all the different blockchains, is there room for many LayerZeros or companies like yours, or is your intention that this might become kind of like so industry standard that it's just kind of like TCP/IP protocol sitting above all the blockchains?
Yeah, I think when it comes to pure networking, like there really is only going to be one that becomes it's winner take all for the most case, right? And obviously we think we've built the best technology. I think the sort of adoption to date mirrors that as well. But I don't think there's a world where you're building on multiple transport layers. And they're very akin to the early internet. Early internet, there was tons of privatized internet, the information superhighway where Microsoft, Apple, everybody was building like their own custom their own custom things, and TCP/IP effectively won by just sheer like writing adapters for every single environment, proliferation early on, being this sort of like neutral environment. And so there is like a lot of background of the same thing. There's a bunch of competing standards early on, but when it comes to technology, you're not going to have like piecemeal, like imagine, okay, between Ethereum and this chain, you're using like these semantics and this overall system, but then for this one using another, and now like anybody building on top needs to manage like 5 different layers of technology. It's just all going to converge to one. It almost always does for these things. Network effects are too strong.
I guess in every sector, since technology began, there's always ends up being 1 to 5 players, and obviously it's in this kind of network situation, you get the network effect, and it just perpetuates itself, I guess, forever. Is your thinking for LayerZero that it'll be the way and the reason that the traditional finance players can interact with blockchain and interact with digital assets and crypto?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely think it's a way, right? So I think one of the biggest problems you see, and it kind of brings us to the design, but I think one of the biggest problems with a bunch of the existing designs was everybody designed this hub and spoke model, a middle chain as we call it, right? So they would just slap their own chain in the middle, and they would say, here's everything that wants to connect. You're going to route through us. We're going to become the central hub of trust and authority. This is kind of akin to Swift and traditional finance. There's like a couple of structures that look like this, but in crypto, it's okay. Everything's going to route through us. And it's a great dream. I think the problem becomes when you're connecting hundreds of billions of dollars of assets is like that thing in the middle needs to have economic security equivalent to hundreds of billions of dollars, and having latent, $300 billion sitting in a system that's dealing messaging is not super practical. And so that doesn't really scale. I think when you're talking, how does JP Morgan and Goldman, when they're settling a trade together, do they really want to route to a third party that has like write access to their chain? Because fundamentally, when you have that model, everybody is implicitly trusting that system, which means if it's broken, even for a matter of a couple of blocks, right? Anything, consensus failure, malicious validators, they can just arbitrarily write the most malicious possible message to every destination chain. So it is a central, systemic risk, central point of authority. It can be, decentralized itself, bunch of nodes, bunch of ever, but if it breaks, like it can just tell you whatever you want and you will believe it. There is no direct correlation between like a message on source and a message on destination. And so the big banks, if they're using a system like this, are effectively handing over all control, right access to their chain to this third-party system. It just doesn't seem like something banks are going to do. I don't think you're going to see them, tell Axelar or whoever, like, hey, if there's a mistake, like you can just issue, $10 billion of the bonds, or like tell us all the settlement happened. And so LayerZero basically enables, like, hey, JP Morgan and Goldman are settling a trade, they can handshake directly. I think that's kind of the most innovative part, is they're both independently attesting to the same thing. They have this in handshake. There is no third party. They can include third parties, so it can be JP Morgan, Goldman, and Swift. It can be whatever, but this is a way for those environments where they can effectively define what that system is, and they can always be signing off on their own. And so looks a little bit different for everything, but allows them to connect permission chain to permission chain, allows them to touch public ledgers, allows them to do all of it. And we're like 50 plus chains today with a mix of both.
Wow. So, and I think we spoke about this once before, I think. So it sounds to me like you're creating the system that a JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs can have their own kind of like dark pools of finance, their own massive ecosystems that they build proprietarily, and interact with each other at the same time, and interact with Bitcoin, and interact with any one of the major crypto, interaction systems or platforms that come out there. I guess, first of all, valid, if that's what you believe, and then second, how do you envisage the world will look like in, let's make it just far enough out so that it's a little speculative, but maybe like 7 years out? How does the financial world look like with LayerZero? Let's say you're successful, and let's say they have these dark pools of finance that are still protecting, and there's some technical integration. How does finance work? Like, what changes in investment banking and trading and all this stuff?
Yeah. So the way I've always viewed it is, at the end of the day, I think if the entire financial services sector could kill our industry with a snap, they would do it. They would be Thanos immediately, right? And so I think if they could kill the industry, they would. I think most of them treat it as this sort of tail risk, existential, risk to the core business, like something that could actually seriously disrupt some of the way that they do business now. And so I think most of them have treated it through that lens. But I think if you look in current structures, like every bank, every financial, they want to own issuance and flow. Like that's where they monetize, basically. And so, yeah, I view, they're still all going to want to own issuance and flow. This is why all of them are having their own chains, right? They want to route all of the trading through them, as much of their customer trading as they can. They want to own issuance. They want to own all of these assets and in order flow. And so JP Morgan's not going to start issuing to Goldman chain and vice versa, right? But there's a world, and I think all of them realize, as much as they want to route internally, like they need to be able to connect and settle to broader systems. And whether that's just the JP Morgan and Goldman settling directly like we do today, or whether it is opening up and doing things on public ledgers and touching Bitcoin and Ethereum and everything else, I think both of those are possible. I think there's a couple of things when you're talking about a 7-year time horizon. I think everybody talks about tokenization and real world assets and all this stuff. You see a lot now about repo settlement, which is already happening in some ways. You see CBDCs, which is like totally a completely separate thing and can end up not necessarily even touching or using blockchains at all. So I think there's still a lot of uncertainty on where things go. But I think ultimately, as with everything, like money and profits are going to drive the majority of it for them. They're not going to do something that is worse for them because I don't know, because it's morally better, right? I don't think that's the expectation we should have of our large financial vendors. Yeah. And so, we just did this pilot with JP Morgan, Apollo, and Wisdom Tree as part of Project Guardian. And they cited the entire process took 3,000 operations for them in their current environment and brought it down to one single transaction within smart contracts. at a significantly faster time and a 20% reduction of cost, right? And I think functionally, like that's what you're going to need to see, right? So, like,
That
I
was
don't know,
using
just bond
LayerZero?
issuance. Yeah, that was using LayerZero, yeah, to settle between
AI
JP Morgan's chain and
or
Wisdom Trees.
was that
Nope, just
AI
they
or
have
is that
their own.
something to do with-
No, no, it wasn't AI. So they have their own environment. They have JP Morgan Onyx, like their chain, and then you have Wisdom Tree as its Avalanche subnet. And they basically were creating tokenized funds for fixed income and equities on a subnet, and then this alternatives fund being issued by Apollo, and then basically dealing with settlement between all
Okay.
of these things. And so yeah, but so 3,000 plus operations to one single transaction at a 20% reduction in cost. Like eventually those things move the needle. The friction that exists in the current system matters. So we try to not be super opinionated on what the end state will look like. Our goal again is like lowest level primitive of the highest possible utility. So maximally expressive and something that will sort of accommodate all of this stuff. People will build the cool stuff on top. We focus on the rails, the plumbing.
So will investment banks die? Will they change into what? Or will they get more powerful?
It's a good question. I mean, I don't think they're going to die. I don't think they're going anywhere. I think if there was a world where they were going to die, we would see some overbearing regulation in a way that would be much harsher than now. I think you see groups leading in. I mean, JP Morgan, Diamond talks very negatively about it a lot, but they've got a 500 to 1,000, maybe even closer to 1,000 person team on this with one of the most sort of like progressive chain developments. You talk about groups like Citi, very progressive. I mean, BlackRock now is like leaning in heavily in a bunch of ways, and obviously the ETF and everything else. Like, I think their goal is to own a bunch of this layer, right? And so the question is just how disruptive will the technology be, and how much of it gets disintermediated. Again, I don't think. I mean, there is certainly a world where their profit expectations go down, but I actually think the much more likely outcome is that what happens is net good for them, but also net good for the average user and consumer, and you disintermediate a lot of other steps in the process that end up paying to some external party. So
Kind of like
bad for a lot of people, probably not bad for the large banks.
Yeah, I kind of liken it to the way I look at it is it's the transformation that's coming to financial markets. Would you say that it's similar to what happened to the consumer goods space when internet emerged? You know, when Barnes and
Yep.
Noble and Amazon came out, just all of a sudden, massive swaths of the consumer industry started getting disintermediated, and it was good for the consumer, and ended up being good for the big guys that embraced it quickly.
Yep, exactly.
Is there a has BlackRock contacted you? I mean, have you guys interacted with them, or are they like a potential customer or a cooperator with you?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, basically every major financial institution in the world and every large central bank outside of like the Fed, right? Like there's a lot of other very progressive central banks, especially you see a lot out of Asia. I mean, Monetary Authority of Singapore is constantly putting out like again Project Guardian. They're heavily involved. We published interoperability paper with them. Helped them publish that. Groups like Hong Kong Monetary Authority, Central Bank of India, Central Bank of Indonesia, like all of these groups, you see it becoming more and more active
India,
right
you said
now.
India?
Yeah, India is very progressive.
Great. So would you say that what you're doing will have a big impact on central banking? And how do you see central banking changing over the next kind of 7 years? And maybe poke a little bit into like if you have any thoughts about like Nigeria, Argentina, and these kind of like frontier market banks as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've had this stance for a long time now, and I think more and more people are starting to side with me. But everybody was always like, regulation is coming and stable coins are getting shut down, right? Like that was it. Like stable coins are going to get heavily regulated, etc. US is going to ban stable coins. I've always had the opinion that US does a lot of dumb things sometimes, but this would be like one of the dumbest. Honestly, I view the US dollar stablecoin as the sort of last last silver bullet / vampire attack to maintain global reserve currency on like a long time horizon. I think right now, when you look at Nigeria, when you look at Argentina and Venezuela and all of these other areas, like all of currency disruption and instability, prior you would have all of this happen top down, right? Everything happens from the government down, but now you're getting like these sub economies on rails that are much easier to use in a way that like these local economies around Tether and USDC are really burgeoning. Like there's a lot of volume happening. It's like and totally disrupting the currency, the local nation currency, and so it's easy in a top-down manner to say, here's this currency, here's the control, like you've got to use it. But in a bottoms-up manner, it's like very hard to unwind. Like I mean, the governments are literally going to need to say like, using blockchains and USDT and USDC are like illegal, or like the US dollar is illegal. Stuff that it's just hard and hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And so I think you see massive adoption there. I mean, Tether right now is like the 22nd largest holder of T-bills in the world, right? Like if there's
16th
large expansion over the next, large expansion, like they're going to be top 10 soon, which is insane. And so like it is very hard to unwind some of this stuff. I think it is so incredibly powerful for the US dollar. I think it is literally destabilizing the currencies of a bunch of these local countries, or like more rapidly doing that. And I think is such a strong and advantageous position for the U.S. government. I just can't see a world like they've surprised me plenty of times before, so it's not to say that it's not possible.
Literally you.
But I think it's so good for them. So that said, I think that is one of the primary reasons, or a primary reason, why a lot of these countries are moving so quickly on the CBDC regulations. I think this is why they're trying to push it out, is they want to ensure they have a digital version of their currency that basically owns this layer. I think a lot of them are not going the blockchain route. I think there are plenty who are not. And so we'll see. I think it's very hard to know what will happen on the central banking side, but I think the central bankers are very aware of what's happening with the US dollar and stable coins. I think the CBDC side is a attempt at control for sure. Like I think that is what they want, is the ability to maintain control of the currency. That's their job. And I think that's not going to change anytime soon, but it's happening much faster than I thought it would. And I personally think a lot of this is from sort of this pressure that's being put on them.
I mean, it's created it's a decentralized lender to the U.S. essentially. I mean, it's like a present that they received without knowing it. Unwittingly, they have a huge buyer of their treasuries, which I think it seems that they're about to regulate that into stablecoins. I think all the jurisdictions are going to have their stablecoin regulations come out, and it'll actually get put in there that you need to have liquid or semi-liquid or treasury securities, which means they're going to legislate across the globe that U.S. won't stay as kind of reserve currency, anyways. So you're right. I think that it could be a danger for them. So that's amazing. I think it's such a good story, and like I said, with my passion around the whole transformation of the ecosystems, this becomes like a super interesting component. So let's stay in this kind of like 7-year horizon. I like this horizon. I think 20 is a little bit too science fictiony. We can like predict all the flying cars and Mars tokens and whatnot. But let's stay in this 7-year horizon, and let's talk a little about how. I mean, you did a lot with AI. I'd love to kind of dig into some of your history of AI, but what about, let's start with the AI crypto merger. Like, where will crypto and AI come together in the 7-year? I mean, AI is on a rampage. Digital assets, with potential bull market coming and the proliferation of your technology and others, it seems like both are kind of like, barreling forward in similar directions. How will they merge and interact? And if you want, in that time, you can talk about some of your background in AI. I think you worked on some really cool projects. I think one was called Premise or something like that. But let's talk about the merger of AI and the future of Bitcoin and crypto?
Sure. So I'll take a little bit of the contrarian stance here. Again, I came into AI with total, doe eyes and blue skies, and anything was possible. And I think what we saw was neural networks at the time was basically was not a new technology, right? Neural networks have been around since the 70s. And what we saw is that now we have this massive abundance of data. And if you take all of this data and throw a bunch of money at it, then it can do something pretty cool, right? If you spend millions of dollars training a system, it can actually produce a pretty cool result. So we went from kind of this growth curve of barely anything to that. And then everybody just from that moment, everybody priced in that's the new growth rate. And this was Elon's you're going to have a self-driving robo-taxi Tesla, nobody's going to own cars anymore. You're just going to be calling them and renting them, and we'll have self-driving cars, all of this stuff. AI is going to solve sort of every system in the world and dominate everything, and truckers will be out of jobs and all this stuff. And so what we saw is this, and then we just hit an asymptote. It's just okay, actually that was what it could do. Great. We throw a bunch of money at it. It's cool, but didn't solve every problem in the world. AI is not running the government, and we didn't get that continuation. I think we're sort of going through the same thing right now with LLMs. LLMs have existed for a long time, not new technology. We realized if we spend literally $1 billion training it, then it can do something pretty impressive, right? And so again, this long and then massive asymptote up, and everybody's just okay, AGI is 2 years away, 3 years away, we're right there. I will say the difference, yeah. And so I think there's a huge amount of people who believe that. I'm under the firm belief on the opposite camp, and I argue this with Noam and Demis and a lot of these guys, But
what is that?
so
You argue the opposite with Melton and Demis, that it's not going to be AGI very soon, and LLM has a terminal capability.
Yeah, so it's not that it's necessarily terminal. It's that people, again, yes, we spent an astronomical amount of money training these things, and it starts to do something pretty impressive. And so people just price the growth rate as happening, but what's actually happening is we're going to train a system with 5 times as much money and a little bit better parameterization, and you're going to get an 8x or 6x improvement out of it, right? It's not even going to be linear. It's not going to be exponential. I think that's what we saw prior. And I think people I think we're going to likely hit this asymptote. Now, it's not going to be hit as immediate because we are now building clusters of 500,000 H100s, and people are spending billions of dollars on computing clusters and billions of dollars on training, right? Mustafa leaves Google, raises around at $1 billion, 4 days later with 7 people and an idea. 6 months later, raises $1 billion of compute to train this thing, right? So you're literally talking multi-billion-dollar clusters, multiple billions of dollars of compute being put into a single run. There actually isn't that much that I think is super innovative on the model side. Parameterization is cool. I think that somehow Facebook becomes the hero of all this. Where Facebook is the champion of open source models, and Llama is now you're training to 80 to 90% of GPT accuracy on a $300 laptop run. So it's been very cool to see that transition. I think that's very in ethos. But I really I'm not a huge believer in I don't think AGI is anywhere near. I actually don't think any of this is that useful. I think we'll see it in narrow domains. I think it's already good enough to disrupt. It's not to say there won't be disruption. I think there's going to be massive disruption in a lot of areas where this is customer service, creating legal doc. There's all these things that people talk about that are just very clear use cases. We're already almost good enough to be there. That's going to happen. I don't think we're going to be at AGI anywhere soon. So I'm setting this up to say I'm the pessimist. I was super optimist. I'm kind of pessimist now. Now, intersection of crypto and AI. We've seen a lot of it over the years. It's not a particularly new narrative. It was around in 2013 and 14. It's been around sort of every cycle. Originally, people's thoughts were we're going to put all of the training data on chain, and we're going to make it open so anyone can train from it, etc. And I was Clearly, that's not going to happen. Like, if there's one thing blockchains are not good at, it's like storage. We're not going to store terabytes and petabytes of data like it's on chain. It's just not happening, right? And so, like, okay, that's out the window. And I think you've seen some other things. Something I really believe in the use case of the intersection of the two, I believe in the most, is that we're going to have agents that spin up and spin down and are kind of ephemeral. You think of this as just like a lambda or something. You're going to have an agent that has to come, do something, and then, basically won't be doing anything. And you might have 10 or 100 agents per person doing things. And I think you'll have agents who are trained for very specific things. And I think you will need a way for these agents to exchange value. I think systems will spin up in the way you might pay for an API today, or you might pay for, whatever. But it's not going to be you paying. Your agent is going to go and have some task it needs to accomplish, and it's going to need to negotiate and pay and settle with all of these different agents. And I think there is no world that these agents are connected to your credit card and your traditional banking system. I just don't think there are structures for that. So crypto as settlement rails and as a payment and transition of value between autonomous agents is something I think is like going to happen. I very clearly see that is something that's so obvious to me. And I think when you talk to the AI people, I think they are excited about that. And the other thing I didn't say is the difference between 2014 AI and current AI is back then everybody was pretty skeptical. Today, actually, the really sharp people, the people who are like really, really smart AI people, they're actually like, they're excited, they're worried, they're like, that is the difference, which is maybe I'm wrong. I'm very willing to, be wrong sometimes. But I will say that's like a very clear difference is like, everybody who was smart in 2014 or like the sharpest people didn't believe in the vision of like all of this stuff happening right then. A lot of people do now. But yeah, so payment rails, AI, crypto, I think is like a very obvious intersection. I think there is incentivization on, as you see this with, who's a popular one everybody likes now? Tau, I think is it. But basically, I think what they're doing is basically saying, here's like everybody parameterize these models, and whoever creates effectively the best model gets paid some amount. So some sort of like crowdsourcing of fine-tuning models is like relatively interesting, but isn't necessarily like need to be crypto. I've not seen any use cases outside of settlement between agents that I'm like, yes, this makes a ton of sense and gets me super excited, but it's not to say that there aren't any.
I mean, and would you say that there's one is Bitcoin the one, or is it going to be everything, or they'll just have a wallet of everything and be able to deal with, any payment system, or will one become naturally the one that the agents use?
Yeah, I think, you have to think about natural constraints of the agents themselves. How quickly do they want or need to negotiate things? I think Bitcoin block time is probably a blocker, but I think as the economy of agents and the economy of AI grows in general, you need the underlying economic security to be strong enough, because then there becomes a very compelling use case to effectively steal resources, right? If you have the ability to double spend or do something malicious at the chain level, that is a very serious vector. It's not like exchanges where exchanges are like, oh, we're going to wait for like X block confirmations and this. Like there's a point where latency will matter, and it creates an economic vector, at least for resources, even if not for money, because the agent is just churning resources. But it's a new interesting vector. So I think economic security will matter more and more the larger that grows. And I think the underlying chosen will be something on the intersection of latency and economic security.
And by economic security, you mean the economic security of a token's value. So Bitcoin being very
economic
secure.
security, the underlying blockchain. Exactly right.
It sounds to me actually that's not that small of a thing. I mean, agents being able to transact and negotiate transactions in real time is actually a massive barrier to them interacting in a capitalist online society. And just getting that one little thing freed up actually could free a lot of capability with AI. It maybe not AGI, but it really can transform the way that we do almost everything online transactionally.
If you want an agent and you want to be able to tell it, I don't know, do do my accounting for me and prepare my taxes for the coming year. Like it might need to go and like request things from very specialist other agents that systems have built right there. I'm not at all of the opinion that there's going to be like this monolithic AI structure that can do everything. I think we see how we, AlphaFold for protein folding and beating chess and going all like these are specific systems that are good at one, like very, very, very good at one thing, trained on very specific sets of data. And I think that is likely the future as well. There are some people who disagree with that, but I think what it means is that you will have very specialist agents and services who like your AI will need to go and negotiate with and do something with.
Do you have some knowledge of, we haven't spoken about this before, about quantum computing? Does quantum computing fall into your curiosity and worldview?
Not really. I mean, I'm in Vancouver, LayerZero labs is in primarily here, most of us. And so Vancouver is actually like quite a large quantum computing hub. There's a lot of quantum companies here. Mm-hmm. I've like the worry with quantum computing is basically that it breaks modern encryption, and so SHA-256 is broken, and that's the big issue is encryption breaks because of quantum computing. So I view it as like this risk where we're going to need to create like better cryptography, but it's like a tool within it, right? So you have it's just like the cryptographic methods of 50 years ago are just like or whatever some time period ago, just like a joke now, like a total joke. Like we have to make more new cryptographic methods, different elliptic curves, all of this, and that is like a tool. So like quantum computer will come out, maybe it breaks this, becomes a new, more expensive cryptographic method that's now secure against it, and like everybody uses that. It's like a tool that you use within your existing systems. There may be some disruption, but it's not something I pay a huge amount of attention to, especially because it's like so binary. It's just like, if it happens, like everything is broken and we either like have a solution for it or we don't, and then we'll quickly iterate the solution. And like, I can't really control what breaks and doesn't break in the meantime. So.
Well, it seems like it's kind of like a hypersonic missile on both sides. I mean, it can break all the cryptographics, but it could also harden if the good guys get it first or fast enough after the bad guys get it, they'll be able to quickly secure all the systems with the quantum.
And I think we can make quantum. I believe you can make quantum resistant. I think there is quantum resistant cryptography that doesn't need quantum computing. So I actually think you can do that ahead of it. It's just very expensive relative to the cryptographic methods that we have now. And so the question is the cost on every single system that exists is a huge friction. And the matter is, when do you actually make that pivot?
That's very cool. What is the these are kind of cool futuristic things. Let's I have a couple areas I want to chat about, but if I was to go back to LayerZero for a second, what are like specific use cases which you think will set you guys apart? Or not set you apart, that's the wrong word. I think the word that I'm looking for, the description I'm looking for is what are a couple of use cases that will transform, to use our theme, what we're doing on a daily basis. Like I'm doing venture capital, I'm doing, we doing advanced trading systems in traditional and digital finance. What is a use case that maybe no one has really spoken about that LayerZero is going to enable once all these banks are integrated and all the chains are integrated? What's a really practical use case which like the average everyday like family office or hedge fund manager or CEO can like say, oh my God, that's really going to change how these financial systems work? Or a couple.
I don't think about it a huge amount through the lens of specific cases. Again, our focus is always like that primitive and just making that as expressive as possible, because then people can build, I joke constantly that Vitalik like certainly didn't think the primary use case of Ethereum was going to be like dog coins for many years, right? Like you build something that can be extremely have like high degrees of utility, and then people surprise you with like what it's actually used for, and then you iterate to like really interesting and meaningful things. And so when I think about it, I think really it's just like you're taking, there's a couple of things that get enabled, right? So one is you take a huge amount of friction away from the underlying system in terms of like, if this is seamless and done right, now you have applications. So one thing I think about a lot that certainly hasn't played out and doesn't exist now, but I've always believed will be like a long-term use case. Like when you used to build, when I started building applications on computers, you just like write a piece of code and you run it on like a server, right? Like your computer runs this. And people who like pinged it and used your application would like use this server, and everything was like constrained to that. You host it in your house or in a data center or wherever. But it was like completely monolithic architecture. And then you look at how we build applications today, and it's just like insane, using infinite microservices, and you're like, you're using all different types of systems that are hyper specialized for a certain task, a certain database, a certain storage, everything. And so when I think about it is, applications today right now are being built in a completely monolithic structure. I have an application that's going to live on Ethereum. And you see this now starting, people are talking, okay, you have a settlement layer, you have an execution layer, you have all of this. And so before we started to get in those discussions, my common sort of framing of it was like, listen, you might have an application that has high degrees of storage. Like you're never going to store everything you want in Ethereum. So like you might have all of your storage on Arweave or Filecoin or whatever, and you might take that and do a really complex computation on Solana, and then you might roll the result back to Ethereum, right? And so there is this world where you start to use, again, a lot of these systems. I think the ones that will live long term, I think anything that's within a shade of gray of an existing is basically going to get washed away as technology scales. You really need to take these orthogonal trade-offs. There's only a few winners of each specific feature, but I think you will have these systems that make very strong trade-offs, and I think there's just a lot of use cases around that. So I think applications will start to get orders of magnitude more complex. I think they will utilize the trade-offs of the underlying systems in ways that aren't done right now at all. And I think that will bring a completely different type of application into the space. And I think that's what then consumer gets. And consumer ends up getting, hey, here's an application like it today, probably in Web 2, or like every application that you use, but it is significantly cheaper, significantly less friction overall, maybe more ownership over data. There can be all of these things, all of the benefits that come with using this stuff. I think that is sort of the end goal. The consumer is not going to know or think about LayerZero. They have no clue. And the way they don't think about, even most modern web developers these days don't think about TCP/IP, right? It's just like, okay, here's a build. Like, here's this way that I do something. And so I think, the goal is that people won't think about LayerZero at all, but economic value and the friction on top is just significantly different than what could exist.
I want to integrate all these different web, chains. I just go to the knowledge base and the libraries and LayerZero. I implement it. It's going. It's kind of like a homebrew kind of for the web, the Web 3, I guess you might call it, or digital asset world.
Yeah, and I mean that might even get abstracted away into packages above. Again, TCP/IP, you have libraries and programming languages that you just use. You don't even think about the things that are 3 steps under.
Right. I think you guys just launched version 2 of LayerZero. I guess why don't you give us the 10-minute, 15-minute explanation of what, or the 5-second if you want, but what's the explanation of what version 2 of LayerZero is versus version 1, in case anyone here already wants to see the evolution of what you guys are doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think when we built LayerZero, there were like a couple of unbreakable axioms for us, right? And the 3 things that we cared about the most are like immutable, permissionless, censorship resistant. And this is, we believe very strongly in those, but the reason that we value those is not just because we believe in them. It's because we don't believe there's any system that can actually scale or be practical long term that doesn't have those. And so when you think about this middle chain structure, you have systemic risk, and we don't think we'll scale that way. But it's also like, if you look at hacks today, I think that's one of the biggest things. Everybody is so focused on like the validator set and how secure it is, how decentralized. And it's like, that's an important conversation. It's a very important conversation, and that matters. But if you look at the $5 billion of bridge hacks that have happened, 0 of them have been because of validator set collusion. Not a single one. And again, It's not to say that it doesn't matter. None. And so like upgradable contracts matter a ton. If you look at Wormhole hacked for $350 million because they pushed a bug into their code. Then they upgraded their contracts again. Another critical bug. Put $1.8 billion at risk, found by a white hat. Another week later, contract upgrade, critical bug, again, $1.8 billion at risk, right? So like all of these, Nomad hack, contract upgrade, socket hack recently, contract upgrade, right? Every single time. And if you think about, like, imagine over the course of the internet, if like TCP/IP was ever changing, and every single time it changed, like everything could break, or there could be a critical bug that could let you bypass, every piece of security, or just like mint money in a bank randomly. Like, of course you wouldn't want that thing changing all of the time if all the security properties change. And so like that should be table stakes. It's crazy. It's table stakes for like Uniswap would never be like, who's going to put $30 billion in there if the like Uniswap labs can just like lose the keys and somebody can just like rug all the money, or they can upgrade or be malicious, right? This was like not acceptable practice, and yet when it comes to bridging and messaging, it's like very commonly accepted. And so all of this, every major hack, almost every major, is either social engineering, so like they've lost their keys, which means it was just overly centralized, or upgradable contracts. And so immutability, we're just like, if you can't give that guarantee to developers above, you'll never get wide enough traction, ever. Like, there's no way a system scales if it's not immutable. That was number one. Two is censorship resistance, right? If you build Rails, like, one, us, LayerZero Labs, should not be able to censor packets. We should not be able to get like an external nation level mandate that says, hey, we don't like these people being able to use the internet or use TCP/IP or these people or anything, right? So the point is, you build the Rails, and like any enforcement can live at the application level. It can be enforced there. That's great. But the Rails themselves should be censorship resistant. I shouldn't be able to like censor votes in an election. Like, there's just all these things that are so obvious. But it matters even more in financial transactions. So if you think about the world now, if you think it's bad, like HFT is bad, right? People are upset that Citadel's front running Robinhood and all of this stuff. They're selling Flow. You have a world like, at least HFT is like moderately meritocratic. You still have a bunch of parties, and they'll have to race to be the fastest. In a world where you don't have non-sorter enforcement or censorship resistant at the Rails level, at the transport layer, you now allow one entity to reorder every single transaction, to front run every single transaction. So you can imagine a world where you say 100 transactions are going through that each have an MEV of 1, so extractable value of 1. If you let them all go through, it's an MEV of 100, but maybe I can rearrange them, make the surface of MEV 250. And maybe I can take your transaction that was going to get paired with this thing that you want to buy, and I can say, actually, this other person is paying me for Flow or for whatever, and I'm going to hold your transaction back and let them pair preferentially, right? And like, when you take away packet level fairness, when you take away this censorship resistance out of Rails, you just have an extremely corruptible system, in a way that, like, if it can be corrupted, it absolutely will be corrupted over time, and you might end up with financial Rails that are even worse in terms of value taken than the Rails that exist today. And so, like, those three things, immutability, permissionlessness, and censorship resistances, are the things we cared about as we built. So you should never need to trust us. You never need to rely on us. And so LayerZero is built single endpoint. It's immutable on every single chain. Anybody can run the infrastructure to basically move messages. So totally permissionless. Anybody can run what we called in the version 1 of oracles and relayers now are DVNs and executors. So anybody can run this, which means if we disappear from the face of the earth, LayerZero as a protocol will exist. Any application can run their own infrastructure. Any third party can step in and run and participate now. The protocol is the protocol and doesn't need us in any way, shape, or form. And right. So I think that's done great. We did about 100 million messages last year, and transferred about $50 billion across those rails. Sorry, you had a question?
So does that mean that LayerZero is running now forever? So if you guys, if God forbid there's a plane accident and LayerZero disappears, or someone buys LayerZero and wants to change it, there's nothing that you can do to erase the existing version 1 LayerZero protocol that's out there in the wild and is running on servers decentralized in some nature.
Yep, exactly right. Until Ethereum or all these blockchains make breaking changes, LayerZero will exist forever. And that was like a core tenet for us. It has to be that way.
What is a breaking change?
Yeah, a breaking change would be like maybe the validation methodology right now is Merkle inclusion proofs, and Ethereum switches from like Merkle trees to Verkle trees, right? Something like that. LayerZero is set up where we could publish a new validation library. Nobody can't remove the others, can't change them, can't delete any, but we can always add a new one that people can opt into. So we can keep up with any breaking changes that happen, but we can never make it so the prior system is not usable. There's always V1 is basically this model of totally permissionless structure, immutable endpoints everywhere. Anybody can run the infrastructure. And you have these oracles and relayers. And there's a couple things we thought people would do. We thought oracles, which is just an abstract concept to us, would basically become meta oracles. And you had people, they would mix and match all of these securities. So as I mentioned before, you might have JP Morgan and Goldman and Swift all in one bundle, all validating a transaction, right? People are I don't want to say lazy, but people didn't do that in a way like it's just totally doable within the system. It was built for people to do that. People didn't do that. And the other thing is that the relayer itself, for things like Uniswap governance, which we didn't really think a ton about at the time. So there's this ability on the destination chain. You can simply change your contract and swap out the relayer. You can switch the components that are used whenever you want. Uniswap said, our governance lives on Ethereum. We want to vote. We want to push out a message, which is like fee switch on, right? That's like the message they can send out. But we don't want to have any ability or multisig or anything on the destination chain to be able to change the relayer. So if the relayer goes down, it's permanent liveness failure in the system. So V1 to V2, much more gas efficient, like all the things you would think as you're moving to a new system. But the two really big changes is one is this meta oracle concept. Now our DVNs, it's implicit within the protocol. You can just say, I want to use X out of Y. These people need to be required. So I want to use, 75 out of 100 of these groups, and like I must sign off. So I want veto rights no matter what. I want them to backstop and have this full thing, but I want to sign off on every message. And then the other is this, what we call decoupling of liveness and security. Now at the protocol level, if a message is being sent and your security set has signed off on it, you don't need a relayer. You don't need anybody else. The user can execute it. The application can execute it. This third-party executor, which is usually what happens, can execute it. But you now have completely permissionless execution. So there is zero liveness built into the protocol or like risk of the protocol. So the things like Uniswap for permanent liveness failure are completely removed. Sorry, second. I'm just going to get this hoodie off.
Can you
my hands too much, sweating a little bit.
Hey, you're
can't
just
be
revving up. You're revving up the engine.
Yeah.
Pellegrino engine is on fire. But does that mean can you revoke those security settings? Like right now, okay, I've given permission, all those things can happen, but can I say, oop, I made a mistake, that decoupling, I'm going to recouple that?
So you can, as the application, you can enforce. So you would never, for the liveness side, it basically lives outside the protocol from execution. You basically, you can pay an executor up front, and the nice part about it is gas abstraction. It's like, hey, you're on Ethereum, you're going to Polygon, you have ETH in your wallet, but like you might not have Matic in your wallet on the other side. So other messaging protocols are like, sign a message on ETH, wait some arbitrary amount of time, make a wallet on Polygon, get Matic in that wallet, and then like claim the transaction yourself. It's like a lot of user friction. You have to wait all this latency to wait around. I have to get this asset in my other wallet. I have to claim it myself. So the nice part about LayerZero and this gas abstraction or execution layer is you're just like, you pay me ETH up front. Let's say it's $1 on Ethereum and 10 cents on Polygon. You pay me $1.10 in ETH, and I'm just going to execute the whole transaction on your behalf on the other side. So the user, it's like magic. They send one transaction on Ethereum, a whole flow is executed. Whatever they were going to do on Polygon is done for them, and they've just paid this all up front in ETH. So that part particularly you don't need to, but everything else the application basically has complete control over. Application sets everything, and they could actually force this coupling if they wanted to.
And the meta oracle is existing as kind of almost like a service broker sitting within LayerZero, and it's also permissionless, immutable, and censorship resistant, or is a meta oracle just like an application that's a little bit more like a traditional application that helps the other three things go?
Yeah, so basically, in version 1, you had this concept of an oracle. And oracles are just some contract who's providing attestation of state on another chain. And what we thought is, because that's just a contract, somebody would just make a contract and then within it say, I need 2 out of 3 of these. I need 7 out of 10. I need whatever, right? You can build whatever you want within that. But nobody built that contract wrapper and said, this wrapper is my oracle here. And then that thing basically does all of the logic. And so V2 just moves that into the protocol. Now it's like, listen, there's all of these groups. And this is like everything from Google Cloud to Nethermind to layer 2 native bridges. Like you can use any validation structure that you want, any validator set that exists, the full validator set of a chain, you can use anything. And so all of these are existing within the system. And then the application just says, hey, I want these ones, or I want 7 out of 10 of these ones, or I want X or Y or Z. And they can define that however they want. And so it just moved from being this system that could exist to being completely implicit within the protocol.
Interesting. And so these 2 new concepts are what you've added in version 2. And then you've added, like, I guess, all sorts of other little features. So is there some big like new systems or products that are coming out now with LayerZero?
Yeah, there's quite a few, a bunch we can't talk about yet. But like last year we did roughly $50 billion of value transferred across LayerZero, and that doesn't even include the applications who are just moving state. You think about in-game assets being moved for a game or like NFTs, all this stuff. None of that's included. Those are pure like dollar value. Multiple billions of dollars of projects built on top of LayerZero. There are many, many, many more billions and billions who are basically coming soon. We've been doing a lot of work with a lot of groups, and I think like there's going to be some pretty amazing stuff coming out soon.
Bryan always has new and exciting secret stuff. I'm just trying to use my leverage to get him to reveal some of his exciting stuff coming out. What about this has been great. What about on your like the Bryan Pellegrino side? Like what is like your like what do you think you're here for? Like what's your beyond LayerZero? Like what I guess you have kids. Do you have kids?
3 kids.
And
Yep.
2 kids. And what is your kind of like your feeling about your life, like about life in general, like purpose? What are the things that interest you outside of obviously the super exciting LayerZero? But what makes the Bryan Pellegrino tick?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. Nobody's ever asked me that on a podcast, so it's good to think about. I came from very small town. I definitely grew up with like a strong chip on my shoulder for a lot of things. I really thrived on competition. My whole life was just me playing games and being competitive with my father, with my older brother. And so I wrestled very competitively. I wrestled all over the country, high school, college, everything. Then obviously got into playing poker competitively. So competition has driven me a lot in my life. And then I just have always liked just solving hard problems. I loved new forefront of industries, people telling me something couldn't be solved or couldn't be improved significantly, and just going out and trying to do this. Because with our supremacist research, there's a bunch of other stuff. Just like I think I think we're smart enough and can do something. So I'm a very big believer of like, if you have sufficient motivation and I really think you can get good. If I was a belief, I can get good at basically anything if I really like apply myself to it. And so a lot of my life has been driven.
How long does it take you to get good at something?
I don't know. I think poker was a really good learning ground, right? Poker took me a while, but it taught me how to get good at things, right? So AI was like a very big ramp up. I think like a quick ramp up. I think running a bunch of, learning to run a company, build a company, do all these things. Like, I think those things have happened quicker. I think I learned with poker, and poker is like one of the most zero sum games, especially the game I play, the most zero sum game in the entire world, effectively. Like, you sit at I just played one-on-one. So when you sit at a poker table with 9 people, you just need to be better than some of the other people there, and that's fine. The game that I played, if you sit down, you're opening yourself up to anybody else in the world. And if they sit, you either like get out because you're scared of them and you lose all the access to all of the bad players and all of the sort of value capture, or you stay there and you fight. So like if you're sitting, you basically have to be the very best in the world and you are constantly getting challenged. And so it's just like you have to be actually the best in the world. So when I played poker, I played and studied like 70 hours a week, every single week for 8 years straight. I took a 3-day break once ever because I was in Costa Rica and I thought I would have internet and didn't have any internet. Like no breaks every week for that entire period. And like it was just like you were the best in the world or you're not. Like your income's cut by 80% if you have to move down in stakes.
Wow.
And so I think there's
what
just
is that
like
game? You said the game you play. It's one-on-one.
just heads up, no limit hold'em. So yeah, heads up, no limit hold'em was the game that I primarily played.
And what does that mean for people that are not poker people? Heads up, no limit.
So just me and one other person playing no limit hold'em, which is just 2 cards in your hand, and I would play up to 501K, which were the highest stakes that ran at the time. So you're playing pots for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, every hand, and so like through that, again, I feel like I learned what it takes to get very good at something. I actually had a very real conversation. We had no intention to start a company. We were building LayerZero. Like it was me and a couple of my friends. We were building a cool project. It was just a problem that we thought was interesting. We were just building it for ourselves, not for anybody else, no intention to start a company. And when we realized that it was like actually a really important idea, I had to have like a very real conversation with myself. Like, what it takes to get very good at something and what it takes to do this. Like, do you really want to go through this again? Right. And I had told my wife she was pregnant with our 3rd kid. I was supposed to be like retiring. We're going to be like hanging out with the kids and playing tennis all day. And I was like, no, like this is something that, I really want to do. And so it went from that to, working 80-hour weeks and building this over the last couple of years. But so I've always been driven. She's kind of used to it. She told me she thinks I'll never actually retire. And so she's never believed me anytime I've ever told her anyways. So yeah, she's kind of used to it. So that's what's always driven me is hard problems and competition. I think now with this, and again, I think I had this chip on my shoulder. So like, yeah, company got acquired prior for like $50 million. Like we had good exits and like had been successful in other things, but I didn't feel like I didn't feel like I had done something to the magnitude that I thought that I could do. And so I guess I had some level of unsatisfaction, even though I had good outcomes and all of that. And so now I feel none of that. Now I feel like, okay, like I've put an unbelievable amount, like my heart and soul into this. We've built something real that's being used in a real way. So I don't know what that looks like after this. But I know that I don't have any of those same drives and ambitions. Like that's changing. I obviously hope I get much more time with my kids. There's a ton that I want to do. I think a lot of things I find interesting and motivating, but I think the competitive side of things has been waning, which I think is good and healthy. Actually, when I read Walter Isaacson's Einstein biography, one of the things that stuck out to me the most, which I found so fascinating at the time, was there's a quote in there on how Einstein basically thought competition was useless effectively. Like, no point. He didn't really like competitive games and he didn't see like any real point on it. He thought like collaboration was much more productive in terms of like net utilities, whether it's soul or collaborative, but competition he's like, what's the point? And I had never even like considered that viewpoint. It never crossed my mind of like, what's the point of competition? Which is crazy to me to read. So I think I'm still very competitive in what we're doing. And like, obviously we have very, very high ambitions. But I think for the rest of my life, I find myself being a little bit less competitive in other things, or less of a need for that sort of gear within me. So I don't know what it looks like long term. I tend to be hyper myopic on like the thing that I'm doing right now. So I just get very obsessed. I think that's something that allows me to get good at something. It's just like think about it before I go to bed in the shower, just like constantly obsessing. So I don't know what it will look like long term. I'm pretty certain it'll be different than now and kind of what I have been in the past. But I'm excited for it. Someday.
I guess Einstein he was coming from a totally different perspective too. Like he was not a capitalist. He was not ever even thinking about I don't even know if he was thinking about the world. He just liked the one thing that you did, the solving hard problems. Probably, I haven't read, but
Yep.
I think I read Benjamin Franklin Isaacson. It's another good one. I don't know if you read that one also, but
I haven't. Yeah, I have it, but I haven't gone into it yet.
you should read it. It's a big contrast to Einstein because he was. I think you'll find a lot of alignment with. I mean, Einstein was. Franklin was a powerhouse in a lot of very different sectors. He was running the newspaper, and he is a statesman. He wrote. He formed he was the only. I think the Constitutional Congress was all 20-year-olds, 19, 20, like Jefferson. All those guys were Adams. They were all 19 to 25, and Einstein and Franklin was like 42. So he was the one that had already he was, so clearly he was shaping that. He was the one shaping it. It's a fantastic book, actually. So what do you think your purpose is? Why are you on the planet in reality? Unless you think we're in a simulation.
No, I mean, I don't think that much about on the simulation side. I don't know. It's not a lens. I got asked this question a while ago on these guys who were writing a piece on me and on my life, and one of the things they asked me is what do you want your legacy to be?
That's a good question.
And my answer was I don't care. I don't think about it at all, right? Like I enjoy the things that I'm doing. I like solving these problems, but I'm not doing it because I want people to remember like Bryan Pellegrino solved this problem. I'm doing it because I enjoy it, or I think it's a problem worth solving, or I think there's some value in any of this. And so, I don't think a lot about my purpose. If I have to define what I think my purpose is, I think my purpose is to try to, provide as good of a life as I possibly can for my family, to teach my kids, to help as many people as I can around me. I think those are like the first thing I did when I got, I got any amount of money is like I paid off my siblings' mortgages and what I mean? Like what I like to do in life is to help people and to do things I find difficult and interesting, work with great people. But purpose is it's just not something I think about ever. So I don't know. I don't have a good answer for it.
maybe it's deep within you, so you don't need to think about it so much. Clearly something's working, but it sounds like you feel like you are constantly happy and motivated and challenged.
Yeah, I have no lack of time and sleep, and it's hard doing hard things sometimes, but no lack of motivation. I love it.
Is there a view that you might hand the reins off pretty soon for LayerZero, or is it more like this is a real passion project and you think that? I mean, it sounds to me you're at the beginning of the story for LayerZero, not anywhere near the end.
Yeah, no, I mean, I started this company with like two of my closest friends. My co-founder and CTO is like my best friend in the world. If something happened to him, maybe I would just be like, all right, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. But I think the two of us are like, I love working together. There's nobody in the world I would like rather be spending time and working with. So I think we got a lot more in us. So yeah.
Awesome. So Bitcoin, what do you think that what's going to happen with Bitcoin in the next kind of year, 5 years? Does it become more important, less important? Does it become a reserve currency? Does Lightning work? What's the price going to be? Just give me we're running out of time, but I want to get like your Bitcoin thoughts.
I
Especially
was a Bitcoin maxi early. I still have strong Bitcoin maxi tendencies within me. So I've always loved Bitcoin. I don't think we'll ever recreate something like it. It is not something that can be done again, in my opinion. There's so much value in just what it is at its core and how it was created and all of that. So I think we're going into a halving, and we just got an ETF, and the price has tripled, and like all of the stars are aligning for like the next year and a half. I made a bet almost 8 years ago now with my friend, which is a very silly bet, but Bitcoin was $700 at the time, and I made a bet with him that if Bitcoin hits 100K, he has to be my butler for a year. It's actually my other co-founder. I don't think I'll ever actually cash in that bet, but I've had this conviction for a very, very, very long time, and I put
what
like
did he
almost
give up?
100% of my net.
What was if it never hits?
The opposite side was actually he was if he made the PGA Tour, that I had to be his caddy for a year, but he still golfs like 110. It was the worst bet anybody's ever made ever. He had zero chance of ever making the PGA Tour. But I really I put like 100% of my net worth into Bitcoin a long time ago, and basically I had this conviction that just like there is a chance that Bitcoin surpasses gold, and I think it is a significantly higher chance than is ever even thought of by anybody. And I still hold that view today. I still think it's likely Bitcoin passes gold. I think everything that we've seen adoption wise, like even go back a couple of years, S&P 500 companies holding Bitcoin on the balance sheet, like stuff that I didn't think was going to happen for like another decade, like far out. Now we have BlackRock ETFs, and like for all of the setbacks that the industry has had, I think we're way far ahead of where I ever thought we'd be, and I'm still ultra optimistic on Bitcoin as a whole. I always will be, I think.
So at a core, you're a Bitcoin maxi, but also other stuff.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin will be 100,000 this year?
I think this cycle we're over 100,000, no question.
Right. What is it today? It's crazy. I think it's 52 already.
52 or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
I haven't even had a halving yet. We got 3 more months till halving.
Well, yeah. Traditionally it goes up after the halving, right? So we are like approaching the all-time high already. And it's yep. I mean, the Bitcoin, the ETF is a massive move, and it's almost like the pent-up demand was actually good for it instead of allowing it, or like, even though everyone's been complaining about the SEC, and there's plenty to complain about, this pent-up demand is and now we're going to enter like the Easter holidays and the summer, and normies and NPCs are now having their ETF versions of it, and it's in their 401ks. And we hit halving, and if it keeps going up, there's just going to be a
supply shock of the halving. Yep.
Yeah, it can be crazy. I have like so much more stuff I'd love to chat with you about, but I want to also respect. I think we have a little bit of a constraint coming up on the end time here, so definitely we're gonna have to do this again.
We'll just do it again. Yeah, absolutely.
Super fun. And hopefully I'll see you soon. I think Dune is launching in a few weeks. I don't know if you're going to be out in New York for that.
I'm hoping. It's right in the middle of East Denver. I'm hoping I can try to make it out. It's hard to tell my wife just hang out with the 3 kids and we go to New York and watch the Dune premiere, but we'll see what we can do.
Bring the kids. I think I'll be out there at East Denver, but I will for sure bail to go to see Dune. So you'll have. I think I'm going to be there wooing you, and we'll call your wife together and say, hey, we're kidnapping him. But this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Bryan, for gracing me and this great world with all these topics, and sharing, really the real deep parts of what you're working on and who you are. I appreciate you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. This was amazing. This was great. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks a lot, Bryan. Thank you, everybody. This is going to conclude our episode of Transform. We look forward to seeing you guys next time. Thanks very much, Bryan, and we will see you guys next time.